Robert Anson Heinlein was an American science fiction writer. Often called the Dean of Science Fiction Writers, he was an influential and controversial author of the genre in his time. He was one of the first science fiction writers to break into mainstream magazines such as the Saturday Evening Post in the late 1940s. He was one of the best-selling science fiction novelists for many decades, and he, Isaac Asimov, and Arthur C. Clarke are often considered to be the Big Three of science fiction authors. A notable writer of science fiction short stories, Heinlein was one of a group of writers who came to prominence under the editorship of John W. Campbell, Jr. in his astounding science fiction magazine, though Heinlein denied that Campbell influenced his writing to any great degree. Within the framework of his science fiction stories, Heinlein repeatedly addressed certain social themes: the importance of individual liberty and self-reliance, the obligation individuals owe to their societies, the influence of organized religion on culture and government, and the tendency of society to repress nonconformist thought. He also speculated on the influence of space travel on human cultural practices. Heinlein was named the first science fiction writer's Grandmaster in 1974. He won Hugo Awards for 4 of his novels. In addition, 50 years after publication, 3 of his works were awarded Retro Hugos, awards given retrospectively for works that were published before the Hugo Awards came into existence. In his fiction, Heinlein coined terms that have become part of the English language, including grok and Waldo, and speculative fiction, as well as popularizing the terms like TANSTAAFL, pay it forward, and space marine. He also described a modern version of a waterbed in his novel The Door into Summer, though he never patented or built one. In the first chapter of the novel, Space Cadet, he anticipated the cell phone, 35 years before the technology was invented by Motorola. Several of Heinlein's works have been adapted for film and television. Life, birth and childhood. Heinlein was born on July 7, 1907 to Rex Iver Heinlein and Bam Lyle Heinlein, in Butler, Missouri. He was a sixth-generation German-American. A family tradition had it that Heinleins fought in every American war, starting with the War of Independence. His childhood was spent in Kansas City, Missouri. The outlook and values of this time and place had a definite influence on his fiction, especially his later works, as he drew heavily upon his childhood in establishing the setting and cultural atmosphere in works like Time Enough for Love and To Sail Beyond the Sunset Navy. Heinlein's experience in the U.S. Navy exerted a strong influence on his character and writing. Heinlein graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, in 1929 with a B.S. degree in naval engineering, and he served as an officer in the Navy. He was assigned to the new aircraft carrier USS Lexington in 1931, where he worked in radio communications, then in its earlier phases, with the carrier's aircraft. The captain of this carrier was Ernest J. King, who later served as the Chief of Naval Operations and Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Fleet during World War II. Heinlein was frequently interviewed during his later years by military historians who asked him about Captain King and his service as the commander of the U.S. Navy's first modern aircraft carrier. Heinlein also served aboard the destroyer USS Roper in 1933 and 1934, reaching the rank of lieutenant. His brother, Lawrence Heinlein, served in the U.S. Army, the U.S. Air Force, and the Missouri National Guard, and he rose to the rank of Major General in the National Guard. In 1929, Heinlein married Eleanor Curry of Kansas City in Los Angeles, and the marriage lasted about a year. His second marriage in 1932 to Leslie MacDonald lasted for 15 years. MacDonald was, according to the testimony of Heinlein's Navy buddy, Caleb Cab Lansing, astonishingly intelligent, widely read, and extremely liberal, though a registered Republican, while Isaac Asimov later recalled that Heinlein was, at the time, a flaming liberal. California. In 1934, Heinlein was discharged from the Navy due to pulmonary tuberculosis. During a lengthy hospitalization, he developed a design for a waterbed. After his discharge, Heinlein attended a few weeks of graduate classes in mathematics and physics at the University of California at Los Angeles, but he soon quit either because of his health or from a desire to enter politics. Heinlein supported himself at several occupations, including real estate sales and silver mining, but for some years found money in short supply. Heinlein was active in Upton Sinclair's socialist and poverty in California movement in the early 1930s. When Sinclair gained the Democratic nomination for governor of California in 1934, Heinlein worked actively in the campaign. Heinlein himself ran for the California State Assembly in 1938, but he was unsuccessful. Author. While not destitute after the campaign, he had his small disability pension from the Navy. Heinlein turned to writing in order to pay off his mortgage. His first published story, ʻhaɪnlaɪn, was printed in the August 1939 issue of Astounding Science Fiction. Originally written for a contest, it was instead sold to Astounding for significantly more than the contest's first prize payoff. Another future history story, Misfits, followed in November. Heinlein was quickly acknowledged as a leader of the new movement toward social science fiction. In California, he hosted the Mañana Literary Society, a 1940-41 series of informal gatherings of new authors. He was the guest of honor at Invention, the 1941 World Cup, held in Denver. During World War II, he did aeronautical engineering for the U.S. Navy, also recruiting Isaac Asimov and L. Sprague de Camp to work at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard in Pennsylvania. As the war wound down in 1945, Heinlein began re-evaluating his career. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, along with the outbreak of the Cold War, galvanized him to write non-fiction on political topics. In addition, he wanted to break into better-paying markets. He published 4 influential short stories for the Saturday Evening Post magazine, leading off, in February 1947, with The Green Hills of Earth. That made him the first science fiction writer to break out of the pulp ghetto. In 1950, the movie Destination Moon, the documentary-like film for which he had written the story and scenario, co-written the script, and invented many of the effects, won an Academy Award for special effects. Also, he embarked on a series of juvenile SF novels for the Charles Scribner's Sons publishing company that went from 1947 through 1959, at the rate of 1 book each autumn, in time for Christmas presents to teenagers. He also wrote for Boy's Life in 1952. At the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard he had met and befriended a chemical engineer named Virginia "Ginny" Gerstenfeld. After the war, her engagement having fallen through, she moved to UCLA for doctoral studies in chemistry, and made contact again. As his second wife's alcoholism gradually spun out of control, Heinlein moved out and the couple filed for divorce. Heinlein's friendship with Virginia turned into a relationship, and on October 21, 1948, shortly after the decree Nizzi came through, they married in the town of Raton, New Mexico. Shortly after having set up house in Colorado, they would remain married until Heinlein's death. As Heinlein's increasing success as a writer resolved their initial financial woes, they had a house custom-built with various innovative features, later described in an article in Popular Mechanics. In 1965, after various chronic health problems of Virginia's were traced back to altitude sickness, they moved to Santa Cruz, California, at sea level, while they were building a new residence in the adjacent village of Bonny Doon, California. Their unique circular California house, which like their Colorado house he designed along with Virginia and then built himself, is on Bonnie Doon Road, 37 degrees 3 minutes 31.72 seconds north, 122 degrees 9 minutes 30.46 seconds west, 37.0588111 degrees north, 122.15846111 degrees west, 37.0588111 minus 122.15846111. Guinea undoubtedly served as a model for many of his intelligent, fiercely independent female characters. She was a chemist, rocket test engineer, and held a higher rank in the Navy than Heinlein himself. She was also an accomplished college athlete, earning 4 letters in 1953–1954, the Heinleins voyaged around the world, which Heinlein described in Tramp Royal, and which also provided background material for science fiction novels set aboard spaceships on long voyages, such as Podkayne of Mars and Friday. Guinea acted as the first reader of his manuscripts. Isaac Asimov believed that Heinlein made a swing to the right politically at the same time he married Guinea. The Heinleins formed the small Patrick Henry League in 1958, and they worked in the 1964 Barry Goldwater presidential campaign. When Robert A. Heinlein opened his Colorado Springs newspaper on April 5, 1958, he read a full-page ad demanding that the Eisenhower administration stop testing nuclear weapons. The science fiction author was flabbergasted. He called for the formation of the Patrick Henry League and spent the next several weeks writing and publishing his own polemic that lambasted communist-line goals concealed in idealistic-sounding nonsense, and urged Americans not to become soft-headed. Heinlein had used topical materials throughout his juvenile series beginning in 1947, but in 1959, his novel Starship Troopers was considered by the editors and owners of Scribner's to be too controversial for one of its prestige lines, and it was rejected. Heinlein found another publisher, feeling himself released from the constraints of writing novels for children, and he began to write My Own Stuff, My Own Way, and he wrote a series of challenging books that redrew the boundaries of science fiction, including Stranger in a Strange Land and The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. The decade began with a life-threatening attack of peritonitis, recovery from which required more than 2 years. In the mid-1970s, Heinlein wrote 2 articles for the Britannica Compton Yearbook. He and Guinea crisscrossed the country helping to reorganize blood donation in the United States, and he was the guest of honor at the World Cup for the 3rd time at Mid-American in Kansas City, Missouri, in 1976. While vacationing in Tahiti in early 1978, he suffered a transient ischemic attack. Over the next few months, he became more and more exhausted, and his health again began to decline. The problem was determined to be a blocked carotid artery, and he had one of the earliest known carotid bypass operations to correct it. Heinlein and Virginia had been smokers, and smoking appears often in his fiction, as do fictitious strikable self-lighting cigarettes. In 1980, Robert Heinlein was a member of the Citizens Advisory Council on National Space Policy, chaired by Jerry Pournelle, which met at the home of SF writer Larry Niven to write space policy papers for the incoming Reagan administration. Members included Buzz Aldrin, General Daniel Graham, rocket engineer Max Hunter, North American VP and Space Shuttle manager George Merrick, and other aerospace industry leaders. Policy recommendations from the Council included ballistic missile defense concepts which were later transformed into what was called the Strategic Defense Initiative by those who favored it, and Star Wars, as a term of derision coined by Senator Ted Kennedy. Heinlein contributed to the Council contribution to the Reagan Star Wars speech of spring 1983. Asked to appear before a joint committee of the U.S. House and Senate that year. He testified on his belief that spin-offs from space technology were benefiting the infirm and the elderly. Heinlein's surgical treatment re-energized him, and he wrote 5 novels from 1980 until he died in his sleep from emphysema and heart failure on May 8, 1988. At that time, he had been putting together the early notes for Another World as Myth novel. Several of his other works have been published posthumously. After his death, his wife Virginia Heinlein issued a compilation of Heinlein's correspondence and notes into a somewhat autobiographical examination of his career, published in 1989 under the title Grumbles from the Grave. Heinlein's archive is housed by the Special Collections Department of McHenry Library at the University of California at Santa Cruz. The collection includes manuscript drafts, correspondence, photographs and artifacts. A substantial portion of the archive has been digitized and it is available online through the Robert A. and Virginia Heinlein archives.